Hello and welcome to another Big Finish video. Oh yes, but it's not Doctor Who, it is the world of Torchwood in The Green Life, where we see Jo Jones and Captain Jack Harkness take on some giant maggots. So this is essentially the sequel to The Green Death, which this story out of the Torchwood versus the monsters, this is the one I've been most excited for, because The Green Death is one of my favourite stories of all time, maybe because I'm a massive Pertwee fan and it's just beautiful, especially that ending gets me every time, and it features my favourite companion, Jo. So I've been incredibly excited for this one, so I've just been so excited to give this one a go, and ever since the announcement of Doctor Who The Collection Season 10, Big Finish were going, by the way, Jo's back and she's fighting giant maggots, pre-order, and we'll see whether Big Finish were right to hype this release up, or we should have just, left this story down the mine. But yes, I have reviewed the first story in the Torchwood versus the Monsters series, Night of the Fendal, so if you haven't seen that review of Gwen versus the Fendal and Fendalines, all that kind of stuff, then I'll leave a little thing there and a link in the description below so you know my thoughts on that story. So without further ado, let's see. So taking a look at the presentation for this release, so the cover up, we have some lovely giant maggots there and the lovely sort of mine background, Jack, and of course Jo Jones, Torchwood The Green Life by David Llewellyn. And the side of the release, and the back for the release, for the running time being 1 hour, and there's the bio for the story, so do feel free to pause if you want to know more about So taking a look at the leaflet, we have these lovely production credits there showing you all the people involved in this release, and then we have these absolutely wonderful cast photos of Stuart Bevan, Katie Manning and John Barrowman, and of course the giant maggot, oh yes, and then we have the cast list there. And the disc art for this release. The Green Life, a story what echoes the same sentiments the original story did, but in a very modern way, using the modern movement of veganism. Now, if you're looking into the Torchwood range of Big Finish stuff, then I think that this is an ideal jumping on point, provided you've seen The Green Death. Looking at reviews of this story, the reviews have been incredibly positive, and I'm definitely going to join that side of the club. Yeah, this is a marvellous little story, much like Night of the Fendal. It honours the original story but puts a 21st century spin on it, with using characters from the original story to really propel it. It's becoming more and more difficult to review Big Finish now, since there are so many wonderful twists like the 4th Doctor Series 8, which I just haven't fathomed a way of reviewing because there's so many spoilers within that, and now, if you know me, I like to keep my reviews spoiler-free as much as I possibly can. So if you do end up getting this release or the story where I'm reviewing, then you'll have the same luxury as what I had. Surprise! So yeah, and this is no exception. This is another example of this story having some great twists. Now, one of the twists and turns within this story you might consider predictable, but it's one of those ones where you're waiting to see if your prediction is right, and when it's revealed you think, yeah, well done David Llewellyn, because it just, having that bit of a twist within there, it just makes it honour the original story even more. So I best cover this. Because it's a Torchwood audio, you might expect, more adult content, but this one isn't on the same level as Night of the Fendal, what wanted you to feel uncomfortable. This story, probably because Jo's in it, it comes across a bit more fluffier, if that makes sense, but it's a bit more lighter, but the story still has some dark and gruesome moments. So on to the actual story. So the story wastes no time. You are literally thrown into the adventure of Jack and Jo exploring a mine. And this kind of explains why Jo came back to Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerychwch, which sets up the mystery of the story, which is very reminiscent of the 3rd Doctor era, what links back to a character from The Green Death, Nancy from the Nut Hutch, which is quite nice. Which leads to Jo and Jack wondering what has happened to Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerychwch, with Jo saying, the soul has been taken right out of this place. Lorries automated, and what is this company called Proper Grub up to? So I best talk about the elephant within the room, the maggots. Now, this is another example of Big Finish turning a very visual monster into a success. The maggots are wonderful. I never thought I'd say that, but they are quite wonderful in this. They are a genuine intimidating threat, and much like Planet of the Drashigs, they expand on the maggots a little bit more, and we are introduced to some new types of maggots, like the alpha maggots, which is quite cool to sort of expand on that, really, which is nice. And let's say Jack becomes the king of the maggots after a pretty gruesome scene seeing Jack fighting off the Green Death, where you see people become bright green and glowing, and of course that happens to Jack. And this probably leads to the darkest moment within the story, in my opinion, where we see Jack asking Jo to shoot him so he can get rid of the Green Death. and obviously Joe is totally against that, you know, because Joe and Jack are really chalk and cheese, and this is what makes it a very interesting character piece of a story, because this story is pretty dialogue heavy, especially in the latter half of the story. And obviously this has only got 3, you know, cast members in, so you naturally expect it to be quite a dialogue heavy story. And as the story progresses, these two characters, they find a common ground despite their different methods. Right, so speaking of the characters, let's talk about them. So we have Jo Jones, played by Katie Manning. It is always lovely to hear Katie Manning, just such full of warmth and bubbly energy. Well, David Llewellyn has just written Katie Manning, because if you've met Katie Manning or you follow her on social media, you know that she's all about wildlife and saving the ecosystem, and that's what this story does. She has that very endearing, optimistic outlook, you know, but this story really tests that optimism what she has. And this story really puts Jo through an emotional roller coaster, you know, being asked to kill Jack, or seeing when Jo breaks down when she realises that her lifetime of good work that she has done has been perverted into something rather evil. Now the story does show how far the characters progress, which is really nice. How far since she's left the Doctor, this shows how, you know, much Jo has progressed since travelling with the Doctor and, you know, been exploring. Captain Jack Harkness, played by John Barrowman, another wonderful performance. Like I said, polar opposite to Jo, very pessimistic, wanting to shoot the maggots, unlike Jo trying to save lives. So Jack is rather blunt, and honestly, he's just a total arse towards Jo, and he's like, Jack, whoa, leave Jo alone, leave her. Especially when he argues with Jo, but of course that does provide with some jokes between them. Are we going to a zoo? No, we're going to watch a 12-foot insect bite the head off a sheep. But by the end of the story, Jo and Jack do have great respect for each other, and I think that's quite interesting to see. As the story progresses, they find a common ground that these two characters from very different backgrounds come together to defeat. So what are my thoughts on The Green Life? Well, I think that it is a good, solid, simple story. It is basically, you know, Jack and Jo stuck in a mine, then, you know, explore the maggots a little bit, then we basically are introduced to the mystery why the characters are here, and then we are introduced to proper grub, the whole mystery around those, and that's basically the whole centre of the story around proper grub, and that's basically very dialogue heavy, like I said, and that's the story. That is literally what you're getting for an hour. But like I said, this story does use modern themes to make it feel like a modern day equivalent of the Green Death. And I do think that it is a fun way to pass an hour. However, as much as I enjoyed this story, I wanted more from it. The story itself felt very condensed, because the story was basically reduced to, oh yeah, this happened, this is why I'm here, let's do this. It felt very condensed. Like, I totally get why it is condensed like this, because you have to remember this is a 1 hour story. You know, and I get why this, but I genuinely feel like this story, there are so many little plot points you could really explore within this story. So this story, you could consider a bit of a double-edged sword, but, you know, I really wanted more from it, but again, it felt very condensed. So it is a double-edged sword, because there are things what I really enjoy, and there's some points what I just thought, wow, we could have done so much more with this. You know, I think that would have been really great, especially the whole start. You know, you could start off with Nancy going, look, Jo, you need to get down here, you know, and then obviously that links with Jack doing his own investigations. There's so much little things you could do with this, and I feel like obviously it's only an hour, but I feel like this story really could have done with expanding, because this is really condensed. You know, this is probably like 2 hours worth of story condensed into an hour. So yeah, like I said, double-edged sword. I wanted more from it, but what you do get is really good. The sound design is wonderful, especially on the maggots, and especially when Jo and Jack are exploring the mines. You've got some wonderful twists, like I said. Stuart Bevan, who I haven't really talked about because obviously he's the main twist within this story. Brilliant performance. And the story does have quite a bleak sort of ending. It is very bleak, and it is kind of everything in the Green Death sort of coming full circle in a way, kind of. So I best rate this story. I'm gonna give this story a solid 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 for this story. I like that this story honours the original, like Night of the Fendal did, but it tries to do the Green Death in a very modern way, with sort of using the idea of veganism, as it were. So yeah, I think that it is a good story at heart. If it's just a nice story to pass an hour. I think that's the best way to describe it. If you want something to do within an hour, and you want just a nice simple story, what's solid, then listen to this. But like I said, I wanted more from it. It did feel very condensed, because I could easily see this, you know, possibly being a 2 hour story, because I feel like there is enough material to last within this story be a 2-hour story, because I did feel like it was quite condensed, and I feel like there are some things what I would have liked to have explored a little bit more, but I guess it's one of those things with sci-fi where you just fill in the gaps yourself, really. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for The Green Life. I hope you have enjoyed this Big Finish review. My review of Torchwood versus the Monsters. I'll see you in my next Big Finish review, which will be the Third Doctor Adventures Volume 5. Yes, we'll see the Brigadier, Liz Shaw, and of course the Green Werewolves, the Primords, and of course Sergeant Benton. So yes, I'll see you in my review of the Third Doctor Adventures very soon. So thank you very much for watching this Big Finish review, and I'll see you next time. So thank you very much, and goodbye.